But let's now talk about the Chancellor, who's in Washington to meet world leaders at the IMF Springs meeting to try to avoid any new global financial crises. And it comes, of course, at a time when the IMF predicting a rather gloomy outlook once more for the UK economy, forecasting it to be the worst performing G7 economy this year. Let's get more with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. And I say gloomy, not quite as gloomy as they were, but, we've avoided that recession that they were talking about originally. Indeed, these IMF forecasts are a big deal, not least because a lot of the world's leading economies have sent their finance ministers to the spring meetings of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. So these IMF forecasts, they came out overnight, and I've put up on a graphic what they're actually saying. You can see here that the UK is forecast to shrink the UK economy by minus 0.3% this year. Germany's going to shrink, but by less. The Russian economy, despite being hobbled by sanctions, is growing by about 1% this year. So is Italy, France. The US growing by almost 2%, China by over 6%. Having said that, Mark, as you say, it could have been a lot worse, because the IMF was previously forecasting that the UK economy was going to shrink by 0.6%, not 0.3% this year. And that upgrade in UK growth from 0.6 to 0.3 is actually the biggest upgrade that the IMF has made since its October forecasts last year. So we've improved, according to the IMF, but we're still at the back of the pack. Right, and why the reassessment? Are they trying to work out what damage inflation is doing to all these world economies? The reassessment, because quite frankly, the British economy is pretty resilient. We're still attracting a lot of foreign direct investment. Manufacturing, while it's been going through its struggles and still coping with sky-high energy bills and that rising corporation tax, is still being very feisty and resilient. Our consumer retail numbers are starting to look reasonably strong. And the IMF is predicting, as for a lot of other economies, that UK interest rates are probably now very near their peak. And then when they start coming down, there should be a boost for both consumers and for businesses. But worries internationally still about the banking sector and what might still be lying in some of these secondary banks in the United States, for instance? There are, and I actually think that a lot of reporters have over-egged these comments from the IMF overnight about discussions going on about the international banking sector. Look, the international banking sector, there's always a risk that it's a confidence trick, right? It's a pyramid of trust, if you like. That's how what we call fractional reserve banking works. And I was wondering why it was that the IMF would put out that statement, we're really concerned the global banking system might collapse, so we're discussing how we might try and stop that from happening. I think they're doing that because they know that a lot of the world's central banks, they don't really want to put up interest rates anymore. No. But with inflation still quite high, if they don't put interest rates up, they'll lose credibility. So they want a kind of reason to not raise interest rates anymore. So a bit of messaging going on. And that reason might be, we might sort of really upset global financial markets and the banking system. Another thing I'd say, and I think there is something in this, quite a lot of people have been saying, why is the IMF so down on the UK economy? And so I've been looking through previous IMF forecasts. Been marking their homework. Yeah, well, that's what I do. And out of the last 28 IMF forecasts on the UK economy, 25 have turned out to be more pessimistic than the actual outcome. But then again, our own official forecasters are pessimistic. The Bank of England was saying the UK would go into recession, a recession lasting 5 quarters. The Office for Budget Responsibility was saying the UK would go into recession. But so far, at least, we've dodged that recession, Mark, as you and I have discussed. But is that in their remit to be on the side of caution just in case? Well, as a former professional economist, let me tell you, you don't get thanked if you say it's going to be fine and then it isn't. Yeah, it isn't, I mean, so there's a sort of built-in bias to be gloomy. Then when it turns out better, everyone feels good. But I personally think the IMF's gloominess towards the UK has gone too far. They've been gloomy about the UK for too long. And one reason for that is that I think the organisation has been led by people, not least the former Director General Christine Lagarde, who now runs the European Central Bank, and the current director of the IMF. They really don't like Brexit. They are part of that kind of European intelligentsia who think Brexit is always and everywhere a bad idea. I don't think that's really a controversial comment. I just think that's a statement of fact.
Yeah, and Washington's a long way away as well. You know, there we are. As ever, Liam, thank you for that.